what we're going to do now is, suppose we have the sales transaction data that we already have. Suppose if you have another data set that includes customer service calls that come in for certain products, right? So we want that information to be brought in to the analysis, right? So, that's what we're going to do. So let's first connect the budget. So I'm going to do convert this range into a table and then link it to the data model. So how do you create table? Control T, exactly. Then make sure that this is checked, because the first row is headers. Click OK, and don't forget to name the table budget table. Okay. So once that is done, you go to Power Pivot and click Add to Data Model. So that will link the table to the data model. All right, so now that's done. Now let's get data from the Access database, and all right, and we're going to bring in product category, product subcategory, and the sales, internet sales. And in addition, we will bring in sales territory also. Now we want to bring in the service calls, right? So how do you bring the service calls? Is a CSV file, comma separated values. So that will be from other sources. Slide all the way down, select text file, and browse. Change this to CSV. Okay, so now we have service calls. Okay, so now you have to, the first row has headers, you have to check that. So the first row will be used as headers. Okay. Then finish. Okay, all right, trust it. Okay. So the service call has the date of the service call, product ID, customer ID, and how long the call lasted and what the resolution was. So those are the fields in there. So now we want to create a new calendar file, a calendar table. Okay, so we did that in time intelligence, remember that? So go to design and then date table and new. Okay. Okay, make sure that that date table is marked as date table. All right. Now we will create the necessary relationships. Home, go to diagram view, and we'll set up the relationships. So we'll put the internet sales at the bottom. Okay, and then we have product key, and then product subcategory key, Then we have product category key. Okay, and then we have the calendar. So date to order date. So this allows us to not have to create separate calculated columns for month and day of the week and that kind of stuff. Okay. So now we have service call, and the service calls are like customer ID and product ID, right? And then we have date as well. Okay. So we can like that. All right. So we'll link the calendar date, call date, all right, and product key with product ID. Okay. So we have two different data tables, and then the lookup values are flowing down into each of these, and the relationships will flow up. So we can use the product ID to in a table along with service calls as well as sales. So you can summarize or you can aggregate sales by product ID, and we can also summarize service calls by product ID and then combine them together in one table. So data coming from two different tables and dimensions coming from a common table, and it will pull information out of two data tables, and then we can pivot that information in one pivot table. Okay, so that's what we are going to do. So let's go ahead and create some measures. So we're going to assume that each, we make each call will cost certain amount, and we want to look at profit for product ID, okay, net of the service call costs. That's what we have a profit. We're going to actually we're starting out with a new data model, so we have to do all the measures again. So let's go ahead and do the measures that we've already done previously, and that will be in fact internet sales. So we'll have total sales, right, equal to sum of sales amount, right? So that will give us total sales, and total product cost is sum of the total product cost, which is the data column, okay, from here. Okay. So now we have the sales amount and then the product cost. So if we subtract the cost from sales, okay, so profit is total sales minus total product cost, which is that. So without, in the data column had no space between the words. So this is the measure that we just computed here. Okay. All right. So now, actually, I figured out that you can set format for multiple measures, not by right-clicking, because when you right-click, format doesn't show up, but you have format right there. So you can go and select that, and more formats. You can change the decimal places. Okay. Now we want to subtract the cost of customer service calls, okay, from these measures. So go over to service calls table. All right. So we have a number of calls. So let's look at calls. So how do you determine number of calls? Count rows. Count rows has only one argument, that is the table. You have to give a table expression. Okay. So, and that would be this, service calls. All right. So, of course, right now it will count all the transactions in this file, but when you use it in a pivot table, you look at the pivot context, the filter context, and then count only those calls. Okay. And so call minutes. So now we want to compute how many minutes of customer service calls were answered, right? So there is a column for that right here, minutes. So what we need to do, we need to sum the minutes. So that. When we do that, then we get the time spent on customer service calls for whatever the filters. Right now, here in the table, it's going to give you the total of all the transactions. Okay. And suppose we want average calls, average call minutes, right? Well, you can use the average function. You can do the average in a couple of ways now. So now that you have the total minutes and number of calls, you can divide this by the other and you will have your average. Or you can use the average function. That also will work. The Excel average function. So here is how you should do division. And when you use the divide function, see, if you use one divided by the other, if the other is 0, then you get into an error situation, right? But if you use divide, then you avoid that error, so it won't give you the error. So that's why divide is preferable. Divide call minutes by calls. Okay. And finally, cost of calls. And we're going to assume, let's just make up a number, how long, what will be the cost per minute. All right. So call minutes times $1.75 per minute is the average cost of calls. Okay, including everything. Salaries and that, this, all the overhead and everything included. So $1.75 per minute is the cost. So this is going to give us the cost of calls. So with that, we should be able to compute the net profit. So if you go back to internet sales, now we have the profit. So we want net profit net profit will be profit minus cost of calls. Okay. So here profit is coming from one data table, cost of calls is coming from a second data table. Okay, so you have to recognize that. So that again, let's format it to currency.